All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Glad to see you here. My name is Scott Hirschberger. I'm a forestry communications specialist with Extension's Forestry and Wildlife program here at UW-Madison Extension. And I will share my screen here. Okay, share. All right. Yeah. So welcome to our webinar on stopping stiltgrass in the upper Midwest, how you can protect our forests. As we get started here, we are going to launch just a quick demographics poll. This is totally optional to fill out. Your answers are anonymous, but if you feel comfortable, please do take a moment to fill this out. This just helps us better understand who we reach with our extension programming and ensure that our programs are equitable and accessible to everyone. And it's also a requirement to demonstrate compliance with federal and state non-discrimination laws and policies. So as we're doing that, just a little bit of housekeeping. We are in the webinar format today, which means you don't have access to turn on your camera or audio, but you do still have a couple ways to interact with us and with other participants. So you should have your chat available. So if you have any comments, you can send those in there. Any experiences that you want to share about stiltgrass. So if you want, feel free to introduce yourself and say where you're calling in from. I know we have people registered from across the Midwest, which is really wonderful. The other important way to interact is through the Q&A. That's where we're going to be monitoring for questions. And as we go through today's presentation, please put any questions that come to your mind in the Q&A, and we should have plenty of time at the end to have a good Q&A session. For those of you who have not attended an Extension Forestry and Wildlife Program event before, welcome. Glad to have you here. We received whatever information you submitted about what email lists you want to be on, so we'll get you added to those after the webinar. And we do a lot of cool stuff, a lot of outreach for private woodland owners in Wisconsin, just helping folks get connected to their woodland, learn how to identify the plants on their land, learn how to use a chainsaw, learn how to just sustainably steward their woodland. If you're interested in forest resilience, thinking about how the changing climate is impacting your woodland, we have some good programming on that, as well as legacy planning and forest farming, non-timber forest products, agroforestry, maple syrup. We do all sorts of things. So in a minute, I'll put some links in the chat to our website, and I encourage you to check that out as well and to follow us on social media. We have a very active presence on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. This webinar is being recorded, so afterwards we will send a follow-up email with the link to the recording. That recording will also be publicly available on our YouTube channel, and we'll include some links to some of the resources we discussed today as well. So with that, I think we will dive in. So just to set the stage a little bit, stiltgrass is an invasive plant that's already quite widespread across the US South and up into the Northeast as well. But as you see, it's a bit more scattershot here in the Midwest. So that's why we're talking about it, because it's spreading and we want people to know about it and be on top of it and know what to do as it continues to spread here. And part of what triggered this effort was what happened last year, 2025. So our colleague at Illinois Extension, Chris Evans, found stiltgrass in woodland in Rock County. And so I was pulled into conversations about how to spread the word and get people to look for it and report it if they found it. And so I put together some social media posts and videos, those reviewed over 360,000 times. And I also sent out a press release to a variety of media outlets, and that ended up with coverage in at least 18 different Wisconsin newspapers, TV, and radio stations. So really good job at spreading the word, and it actually did result in the detection of 3 more populations of stiltgrass in Wisconsin, and we'll hear more details about those populations later. But the big picture is that we think there's probably more out there. It's going to continue spreading, and we want folks to have the information they need to really take action on it. So I think probably all of us on this call understand in general why invasive plants are a problem in our forests. Some of the impacts of stiltgrass in particular: it grows in these very dense mats that crowd out native plants. It alters nutrient cycling in the soil and soil microbes. And in doing so, it actually reduces wildlife habitat. And then through all of this, the dense mats that dry up in the fall actually provide a lot of fuel for fires. So they make wildfires more frequent and severe. So with that, here's the plan for today. My colleague Keith Phelps is going to share how to identify stiltgrass. Then I'll talk about how to report it and prevent the spread. We'll hear from Mark Rins about the current status of the stiltgrass infestations in Wisconsin. And then Calvin Norman from Pennsylvania will share what's been happening out there with stiltgrass and what lessons we can learn to our management of it here in the Midwest. So I will stop my share now and turn it over to Keith.
All right. Thank you, Scott. I'm going to share my screen here. We'll get set up with the slideshow. All right. Can everybody see this okay? Awesome. So as Scott mentioned, I'm going to walk through how to identify stiltgrass. We're going to view some common identification characteristics of that species, and then we're also going to review 3 common species that we see in the Midwest that could be misidentified as stiltgrass. So to begin, we'll ground ourselves with just some basic facts about stiltgrass. This is an annual grass. It is going to spread horizontally, have a sprawling growth habit, hence how it creates dense mass in the forest. We typically see this plant at about 1/2 foot to 3 foot high. In forested settings, its preferred habitat is going to be moist, shady areas. So areas in the woods that I would look for this plant would be along trail edges, in ditches, and stream banks, for example. This plant was first reported in 1919 in the United States in Tennessee, hence why its epicenter for invasive potential is really in the Appalachians and southeast US, but it is slowly moving northward into the upper Midwest. We think that this plant was most likely introduced to the United States via packaging material, so actually used as packaging material around the turn of the 20th century. For stiltgrass identification, there are going to be 3 things that we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at the leaves, the roots, and the flowers. The next accompanying slides, we're going to be looking more in depth at the leaves, roots, and flowers. But here I just want to point out what we're going to be cueing in on. So for the leaves, we're really going to be focusing on identifying an off-center silvery midrib. For the roots, we're going to be looking for rootlets, or little tiny stilts on lower sections of the stem. This plant does have thin, weak roots, so it will pull up easily, and these rootlets or stilts is where stiltgrass gets its name from. The flowers are going to be 1 to 3 delicate spikes that occur around late summer to early fall. So let's focus first on the leaves. The picture on the left that we see demonstrates that silvery off-center midrib that we see on stiltgrass leaves. The leaves themselves are going to be 2 to 4 inches long, 1/2 inch wide, and they're going to be pointed at both ends. Also, the leaves are going to be spaced along the stem, as occurred to some grasses, which usually have leaves at the base of the plant, for example. Here is a good picture of when we pull up that plant. Remember, it's easy to pull. It's going to have those rootlets or stilt roots that occur at the base of the plant. So that circle in black there. For the flowers, we can have a typical 3-spike flower structure or 1 to 2 spikes. But really, flowers can be difficult to identify when we're comparing with other grass species, so I always ask people to look at the leaves and those rootlets in addition to the flower. Stiltgrass ID through the seasons, looking at some things of our phenology and how this plant is changing through the seasons. In the spring, we're going to see it in Wisconsin emerging in May. And then in late summer and early fall, we're going to have this plant flowering generally around mid to late September in Wisconsin. And then in late fall, we're going to see the seeds being present on this plant. And also the stems and leaves are going to turn a distinctive purple-brown color, so we can even identify this species throughout the fall. I'm going to review 3 similar species that we may misidentify with stiltgrass. The first one is going to be rice cutgrass. So rice cutgrass is a native perennial grass. It can be found in similar settings to stiltgrass, so along stream banks, ditches, forested wetlands, and it does have leaves that are spaced along the stem. However, there are some key differences that are going to distinguish this plant from stiltgrass. For one, we have a very rough leaf and stem texture. So if we touch the leaves and stems, it's going to feel very abrasive, almost feel like it's cutting our fingers, hence the name rice cutgrass. We also have thinner and longer leaves without that silvery midrib, and along the stem, we're going to have a hairy, swollen joint or node. So let's look at some of those features more in depth. A zoomed up feature or picture of our rice cutgrass shows those Barbie features, that rough leaf and stem texture, and thinner and longer leaves without that silvery midrib. And then we have this distinctive hairy swollen joint or node along the stem that we see circled in the red. Smartweeds are a native perennial forb, non-flowering grass that shows up in wetland environments. I think people can misidentify this plant with stiltgrass as the leaves do somewhat look similar and they have a similar light-colored midrib. However, smartweeds are going to have very distinctive pink flowers with small petals and a collar or membrane on the stem. Looking at those features, we see those pink flowers with small petals in the picture on the left, and then this really distinctive membrane or collar around the stem that distinguishes this plant as smartweed. The last plant that we'll review is going to be crabgrass. This is a non-native annual grass that usually is present in agricultural or lawn settings. I think where people can get confused with stiltgrass is it does have a similar three-spiked flower. However, crabgrass is going to be a lot more squat and shorter. It's going to have flattened stems, and its roots are going to be a lot more sturdier, so it's generally going to be harder to pull. And we do not have that distinctive silvery midrib that stiltgrass has. So looking at the leaves and stem of crabgrass, we see on the left that lack of silvery midrib on the leaves. We see squat stems, harder to pull, and no rootlets or stilt roots for the picture on the right. If we are in doubt about stiltgrass identification, I think the two most important things for us to focus on is looking at the leaves for that silvery midrib and those rootlets, that distinctive stilt-like structure at the base of the plant. And at this point, I'm going to pass it back off to Scott, who's going to talk about reporting stiltgrass and preventing the spread in the upper Midwest.
All right, thanks, Keith. So the first step to reporting it is to take a variety of photos. And the reason that we want to report it in the first place, especially here in the upper Midwest, is that it's not yet very widespread. And so really understanding each new place that it arrives helps natural resource professionals to understand how fast it's spreading, where it is, to understand how big of a problem it already is, how big of a problem it might become, and to help prioritize outreach efforts as well as coordinate management efforts, because there are a lot of invasive plants out there. And so knowing which ones are kind of making headway is really important for triaging resources. So the first step is to take a variety of photos. So those nice close-up photos are really important for confirming identification. As Keith pointed out, a lot of those ID characteristics are very small details. And so you need close-up photos to be able to confidently make that identification. It's also useful to have something that's a bit of more of a mid-range shot to show the local density of the infestation so that folks can see, are there other native plants growing here? How densely packed is the stiltgrass or whatever other invasive plant you're reporting? And then even zoomed out further, step back and get a sense of the landscape. What is the overall ecosystem that you have here, and what is the broader scale of the infestation that you're looking at? So these are all photos from the recently reported infestation in Grant County that was reported in 2025. A few tips on taking in-focus close-up photos, because this is something that can be pretty challenging with a smartphone. Smartphone cameras are really good in general, but often struggle with close-up photos of small details like on plants. So my first tip is to put your hand or another solid object like a clipboard or your pant leg, something like that, directly behind the feature that you're trying to photograph. That will give the camera a wider plane to focus on, and it often focuses much better immediately once you do that. In most cases, that's probably going to be sufficient for you. If that doesn't work or you're really trying to get a very close-up photo, you can use your camera in manual or pro mode and manually adjust the focus. So on iPhone, there is not a built-in way to do this, but you can do it through a multitude of third-party apps that you can easily find. On Android, if you have a fairly recent version of the operating system, you should be able to do this from the built-in camera app, or you can download a third-party app to do it. So this is what it looks like in the built-in camera app. You would click More, then go to Pro, and then click on this focus, change that to manual, and then adjust this slider down here. So you basically frame up the shot the way you want it, get your camera nice and close to the object you're trying to photograph, and then adjust the slider until it's perfectly in focus, and that's where you take the photo. So once you have those photos, if you're here in Wisconsin and a lot of the nearby states, we really encourage you to report it through EdMaps. So this is a publicly available interactive database that you can access via the app on your phone or via the website on your phone or the computer. And the reports of plants are verified by experts in the particular state. So here in Wisconsin, Mark Renz and his colleagues at the Renz Lab and the Wisconsin First Detector Network, they are the ones who review reports of invasive plants. In Minnesota, it's folks at the Minnesota DNR, and then others in other states. But that's a real advantage. It's people who are experts in the flora and fauna of that state who are verifying the reports. EdMaps is also used for other invasive species, so insects, pathogens, and others. And then it's, again, subject matter experts who review and verify those reports. Now, a lot of people already use iNaturalist, and iNaturalist is awesome, but the data from iNaturalist isn't automatically shared with EdMaps. The folks who run EdMaps have to go in and manually transfer those records over. So we really ask, if you can, to also report via EdMaps, not just iNaturalist. And luckily, it is pretty easy to submit a report through EdMaps. So I just want to walk you through an example. This is a photo of the infestation in Rock County last year. And this is what information was submitted with that report for this particular part of the infestation. So you identify the species. Positive means that you did indeed find that plant that you're reporting. Observation date is self-explanatory. And then basically the rest of it, if you're unsure about anything, just leave it blank, and that's okay. But if you know any of this information, it is helpful to include. So in this case, this part was marked as a density of 50 to 75% in a hardwood forest habitat, and its abundance was a dense monoculture. And this was late in the summer, so the plants were mature. Now, another piece of the reporting is the actual location. So if you just observe a single plant or a small little patch, you can just drop a pin on the location. But if you have a larger infestation, you can actually map out a polygon when you're reporting through EdMaps to show the extent of that infestation. So that's what happened here with this report in Grant County that came in last year. And so then from that, it automatically calculates what the infested area is, and you can also indicate how what the area was that you surveyed. So we know how much of that area that you surveyed was actually infested. With the location, by default, the exact location is publicly available. But if you are concerned about privacy for one reason or another, there is a way to toggle that off so that it's only the approximate location that's publicly available, and then the exact location is only available under the hood to the administrators of EdMaps. So that's EdMaps, and it's used by a lot of states, including Wisconsin. If you're in Michigan, they prefer that you report through the Midwest Invasive Species Information Network, which again works very similarly to EdMaps. It's just a different interface, a different system, but you're going to be submitting the same type of information, including the photos that you take. And if you get confused with any of these reporting tools, you can always reach out to an invasive plant expert in your state, and they'll help walk you through submitting that formal report. So we'll talk later about what you do in terms of management once you've found stiltgrass on your land. But even better than having to manage it is preventing it from getting there in the first place. So I do want to talk about that as well. And these tips I'm going to share really apply to all invasive species. They're not specific to stiltgrass. So get in the habit of cleaning your boots every time you go from one natural area to another. So ideally, you're doing this when you leave one forest as well as when you arrive at the next one. So you can take a stiff brush and clean off the soil and debris from your boots. And then if there's any lingering plant material or dirt, just scrape that off using a hard metal object like a screwdriver, a hoof pick, a butter knife, or tweezers. If you're at a location that has one of these built-in boot brush stands, use it. That's what they're there for, is to be used. And this should be considered like kind of the baseline, like minimum, like this is best practice for just always be in the habit of doing this. If you want to go the extra mile, and especially if you're coming from somewhere that you know has an infestation you're trying to avoid spreading, or if you're going to a particularly sensitive natural area, you can wash your boots with soap and hot water. And if you're particularly concerned about invasive pathogens, a lot of those aren't going to be killed by soap and water. You need to actually disinfect your boots. So a 70% alcohol liquid or spray solution can do that, as well as bleach, basically a 0.5% sodium hypochlorite solution for a few minutes. And so again, if you have the ability to do this, this is awesome. It helps a lot, but at least get in the habit of the mechanical cleaning every time. And this goes not just for your boots, but really any equipment and gear you're bringing with you. So depending on your setup and the type of equipment, you can use water, compressed air, a leaf blower, and or hand tools. And you want to think about particular areas like tires, fenders, the undercarriage, floor mats, running boards, anywhere that might get some dirt or debris in it. And it's best to do this in an area where you're already loading or unloading equipment and where you can easily monitor for any sprouting plants because, you know, that dirt that you're washing off is going to end up on the ground and you might have some seeds sprout. So you want to be able to see those and take care of them if needed. And I'm going to put in the chat here links for more details on best practices here. So the first one is the Wisconsin Council on Forestry's best management practices for invasive species. The second one is the Minnesota DNR's guide to cleaning heavy equipment. Those are both great resources. And then again, tools, anything, any tools, make sure you're cleaning those off as well. And then we know that our pets can get seeds and burrs and other things stuck on them. So make sure and clean them off just like you're cleaning off yourself and your clothes. And that'll go a long way towards preventing the spread. So that's what I've got on that topic. And now I will turn it over to Mark to introduce himself and talk about where we are today with Stiltgrass in Wisconsin.
Great. Thank you. Scott, just want to make sure you can hear me okay and see my slides.
Yep, you look and sound good.
Okay, great. Thanks. Again, a pleasure to be here today. I'm a professor and extension specialist at UW-Madison and Extension. And I'm here today to talk to you about the current status of stiltgrass in Wisconsin and some of the efforts that we've been doing. I think Scott hit on some really key points, is that it's an annual plant and it's kind of like crabgrass, but it's invading shaded areas. And the other key point is it's primarily spread by this long distance transportation, as we'll see as well. So as he said, and Keith said, it is first documented in the 1919 in Tennessee, and it's been spreading rapidly since its introduction. You can kind of see in the Midwest, in Indiana, in Ohio and Southern Illinois in the 50s, it was quickly introduced into there. Missouri wasn't documented till the 1990s. Iowa found its first population in 2014, Michigan in 2017. And so you can kind of see this spread northward. And Wisconsin is also recently, as 2020 was our first infestation that was found in La Crosse, Wisconsin, up here. So I just kind of want to talk briefly about the La Crosse status. It was found at the Wisconsin DNR Cooley Experimental Forest, found by a visiting botanist. And I want to credit Wisconsin DNR really stepped on it and was really trying to deal with this. It was patchy in nature, but there was a substantial amount. You can kind of see over time, they've changed some of their management. They started with just some spot treatment, post-emergence, and then they went to a combination of pre-emergence followed by a follow-up post. And they tried various different herbicides, which we'll talk about in the Q&A. But the key thing I want to point out is that pre-emergent is going out earlier and earlier because we're finding those seeds emerge really early in the season. So getting that pre-emergent out early is really important. And we still miss some, and so we need to come back later. So they have really made some great success with this, but they're still trying to eradicate those populations out there at the La Crosse site. If you're interested in the details of this, they have a great story map article that kind of highlights what they've done, as has good pictures as well. I will say that, you know, we were hoping that we would have eradication earlier on in the process because the seeds persist very small amounts of time in the soil. You know, so they were using these pre-herbicides and following up on escapes, but they still were getting a few plants that were continuously keep re-emerging. So they're likely missing plants somewhere. And I think in hindsight, which is 2020, they were really trying to limit their herbicide use, particularly with the pre-emergence, and do like a spot treatment where they knew plants were. And so they likely were just missing some of these plants and allowing that population to continue at small levels. And so as you'll see with some of our efforts moving forward, we're trying to do more of a broadcast treatment, really trying to take those out before they emerge. So things were looking good in Wisconsin from 220 on. We didn't hear any reports at all. And then one of our colleagues in Illinois sent me a text in 25 saying, "Do you know you have stiltgrass in Rock County?" We were like, wow, this is incredible. It was the second known population, so we quickly jumped in, looked at that site. It was owned by a nonprofit. It was approximately 40 acres in size. And we went there and we found it was widespread in many areas along the trails and the ATV and access areas. But it was isolated in the denser populations in the forest, as you can see with some of these pictures. So what's the first thing we did when we found this infestation? Well, we went and we mapped it. We wanted to know where on that property it was. And so don't pay attention to all the lines, but look at the dots. Those are us mapping it at different times, whether it was August or October. We went back and did more. And what you can see is the majority of those populations are on the edge of the trails or adjacent to the edge of the trails. And while we have a few populations that are in the center of the forest, it's really pretty minimal. And I think that's good news for us and also an indicator. If you're out looking for this, this is the first place to look, is on these trails. So we did some extensive monitoring and found where these populations are on the edges and as well as on the inside of those areas for future management. So creating a map really helps with management. While we were doing this, you know, Scott and his crew was doing this really effective outreach campaign. And as a result of that, we found 3 additional properties that were infested. The Grant County site that Scott talked about was rather widespread, but they're actively managing it. There's several large sections of it. I believe it's predominantly along deer trails and other areas. So DNR is working with the landowner to get a good action plan. What was really unique from our outreach campaign, we had a local person that works for a garden company, a landscape company, actually reported it not on their property, but a neighbor's property. And it was just along the edge of a road that you can see here, where we had one property was infested, just one property in this whole community. So DNR has reached out to them and trying to get that one under control. Probably the biggest success is this one in Walworth County, where a county staff member, after seeing our reports, was out looking on a trail and by a pond and found a small patch that was around 30 square feet or so in size. They went back and surveyed essentially the entire forest, I think, with the assistance of DNR, and that was the only patch they found. So they went out and they eradicated it or controlled it, and they're going to follow it up for years. So what we're seeing in most cases is pretty isolated populations popping up, likely from long distance transport, and very few forests that are widely invaded too. So that's good signs that we're early on in that invasion process, and eradication or containment is really a good option. So I want to go in a little bit more detail on how we're looking to try and manage and hopefully eradicate this Rock County infestation, because it's by far the largest. Wisconsin DNR and the landowners have been really excellent at collaborating with us, and they've given us some funds And we're working with the landowner to try and eradicate this population. So what was our approach when we found this infestation? The first thing we wanted to do was go in and try and eradicate all the ones we could easily gain access to in that area, which was along the trails. And what we decided to use was a herbicide called clethodim, which is a grass-specific herbicide. And the reason we chose that is we wanted to keep some other plants there that can compete with this stiltgrass. And in particular, even though it harms grasses, we used a really low rate that would not harm or would not kill the perennial grasses, and they would allow them to come back based on communications with our colleagues in other states. So what we did is we broadcast sprayed all of the trails that where the major infestations were with a low rate of this herbicide, 8 fluid ounces per acre. And we tried to go in and visibly spot treat a lot of those patches with a lower rate too that were easily accessible. At the end of that in August, we felt really good, like we got almost all of them. We came back in October to do some analysis. And what you can see is where we sprayed it, as you can see down here, we did a really good job at killing the plant or stressing it so severely that it wouldn't produce viable seeds and it was dying essentially. So that was the good news. It was a really effective approach in areas with perennial grasses. Those perennial grasses like Kentucky bluegrass and other things were still doing just fine. The bad news is we found that we missed more than we thought we missed. As you can see here, here's an area that wasn't treated versus treated there as well. So we were getting some viable seed that was being made. So, well, that was unfortunate. We said, this gives us an opportunity to see how well our treatments are at reducing the seeds in the seed bank. Because really in managing stiltgrass, I want you to think about it as how do you manage crabgrass in your lawn? You know, we need to prevent that seed bank and reduce it so that there's no seeds in the seed bank anymore. So because we had this scenario where there were some areas that weren't controlled and other areas that were, we decided to collect soil cores and bring those soil cores back into the greenhouse in the treated and non-treated areas and see how many Japanese stiltgrass seedlings would emerge from those cores. So that's an estimate of how much was in the seed bank. And so as you can see, stiltgrass has very unique, very, very broad-leafed grasses that come out that are really easy to identify. So we took cores in full sun versus partially shaded areas that were treated and not treated, brought them into the greenhouse, and over the winter, we had students germinate these and count how well we were reducing the seed bank. And the good news is we're doing a really good job. So in one application of this clethodim, if we did not treat, first of all, in shaded areas, we're getting around 30 to 35 seeds per core, which is a 4-inch diameter core. And in the full sun, we're getting closer to 60, so even a larger amount. But when we treated those areas, we reduced that over 85% by just one application. So highly, highly successful. And that was really less than 4 seeds were found when we're finding between 35 and 60 seeds. So again, a really, really successful, quick reduction in that seed bank, which gives us hope on eradication if we can prevent seed production for really 2 years. So what are we doing now with this? Well, we're taking the advice of our colleagues in Penn State, and you'll hear from Calvin in a second, where they really recommend doing a pre-emergent herbicide in these forests. So we looked at their data and decided to use a protiamine, which is a pre-emergent herbicide. And we used the product called Evade, and we applied it in late March all along the alleyways and near the house here, as you can see on these grassy areas. Again, trying to just prevent any of those annuals from germinating, and it won't harm the perennial species that are there. We were not able to spray it in the forest because it's not registered for use in forests, and we just didn't have access. But we're really hopeful that this will make our job easier in the coming years. And then our plan is to come back again in August, and really August is really a good time because that's when these plants are really easily visible. and apply them with a reduced rate of clethodim again, and really try to get 2 years of no seed production along those ATV trails and really grow that population down where we're just really trying to get a few plants after this next year. We are also looking into being able to treat some of those denser forests with the pre-emergent herbicides, and we're looking into options of maybe applying them with a drone once the leaves have fallen off to give us some success in those areas. But those are really our challenges in these areas, is access to these interiors of these forests can be challenging. There's a lot of other material there that prevents us from getting in. And then what I didn't show on the map, we have an individual property owner that's on that property that we have yet to get access to control that population. So that's a challenge that's going to probably set us back. But we're optimistic we're going to see a rapid result. And we really think if you do find this plant, a rapid response using pre-emergent and post-emergent herbicides can be really effective. So just to kind of sum up before you see some horror stories from Calvin and what's happened, how they're dealing with it in Pennsylvania, we are going to see more stiltgrass in the future in Wisconsin. I'm convinced it's around us. It's moving north. It is a prohibited plant. So if you do find it, control can be mandated by our DNR. And in Minnesota, I believe it's the same way. So be on the lookout for this plant. What we're seeing in Wisconsin is all our introductions appear to be long distance, not by nearby fields, but by bringing in contaminated equipment or vehicles or something of that nature. So the good news is we can mitigate that by cleaning our equipment before we bring it in, or making sure people clean it. And if we can't, we bring in material, we forget to clean it, survey those areas extensively where those are introduced. And really, I think the key thing is to look along those trail edges, because that's when we're seeing most of it popping up. The good news is it's an easy invasive plant to control using pre- or post-emergent herbicides, and there's many options to select from. We can easily keep this under wraps and control it for multiple years. So hopefully you don't see it, but keep a lookout for it, particularly in August is when it'll become easily visible. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Calvin. So Calvin, take over, and he can talk about how bad it has become in Pennsylvania.
Thanks, Mark. Just for fun, I stole one of my photos for my next slide, just to nail on Mark's point here. So this is a forest understory. It's a little bit open. There was a little bit more ash in this forest, but it's mostly oak hickory dominated. As you guys can see, all of this wonderful greenery down here is stiltgrass. There's a little bit of snakeroot in here, which is native, and we like to see it. But the rest of this understory for about 4 acres is stiltgrass. Stiltgrass, if unmanaged, will eat your entire forest. Keith mentioned it likes shade, but I'll tell you, you can find it basically anywhere where you have soil. It'll do full sun, it'll do full shade. I've even found it in the understory of hemlock forests. So it's a very adaptable plant that just likes to be anywhere you got soil. You can find it in front yards, you can find it in forests. Okay, let's talk a little bit about how we manage this plant. So as Mark mentioned, number one thing you got to do is prevention. How we mostly see it moving is on heavy equipment used in forest and construction. So if there's a harvest, it will come in. It will either come in on the harvesting equipment, or it will take advantage of the sunlight that the harvest provides and just blow up in an area. I know I just said that it likes full shade. It does okay in full shade, but normally what happens is you see it come in a full sunlight or semi-sunlight situation and then push into the full shade. It tends not to start and do well in full shade, though if it has an established population, it can push into full shade just fine. So what normally happens is we see it come in on some kind of equipment a lot of times, or it'll come in on ATVs, horses, and then you find it also a lot on hiking trails and stuff like that. So anytime there's an established trail and you think you have stiltgrass in the area, the first place you want to do is check the trail and around the trail. Like Mark was saying, we just want to make sure we're washing all of our equipment. Other places to check are deer runs. Deer are vectors of spread for invasive or for stiltgrass. Also, you want to check around any ditches and stream banks, as it can flow down any ditches and stream banks that you have. So aquatic invasion happens quite a bit. So you just want to be aware of that. If you have, and then the other thing that can really help you prevent invasion is having an intact ecosystem. So if your forest isn't heavily invaded, it seems that your forest will be better able to resist the invasion of siltgrass. So you want to try to limit the number of invasive species you have in your mid and understory, and that will limit the success of siltgrass as well as keeping your forest happy and healthy. Obviously, it's good for everything else in the environment, but it's also good to keep siltgrass out. So let's talk about control. If we're thinking about our IPM triangle, I know Mark talked a lot about chemical. Let's talk about our non-chemical controls. So you can do mechanical control. It can work. I'll just tell you, it's very tricky. So you can go out there and pull it up. That'll work just fine. That works for small invasions. But once you see that whole force understory to be taken over, you can't pull it up. Um, the other thing you're going to do is if you pull it up, you want to make sure you double bag it. I've seen a couple times where there's a great effort to pull up a bunch of stiltgrass, and then it goes into one garbage bag. That garbage bag develops a tear, and you can just find a trail of stiltgrass from the forest out to where the volunteers were disposing of the stiltgrass. It was pretty funny, I'm not going to lie, but it was kind of sad. So always double bag, and then don't try to compost the stiltgrass. It needs to go into a landfill. The other thing you can do is you can cut it. However, you only get one bite at the apple if you're going to mow it down. It does adapt to frequent cutting, so it will do just fine in a lawn. So if you're going to go in there and cut it, you get to cut it once, and you want to cut it right before it goes to flower. In Pennsylvania, that's in mid-August. You guys, your stiltgrass phenology is a little bit behind us. So I'll let Mark talk about when cutting would be ideal, but you get one shot at cutting it. If you cut it twice, it adapts to multiple cuttings and will flower at low height. Fire can work to control stiltgrass, but like Scott said, it can be a fuel that makes a really hot fire. Also, it grows really dense, and so it holds moisture really well, and it can stop fire. So it doesn't get along with fire too well. I wouldn't try to control this plant with prescribed fire. The best thing you can do is to have, as Mark was saying, a mixed methods approach to control. You could do a little mechanical, but mostly we're going to rely on chemical control. If you have a small invasion, backpack pump sprayers are fine. However, anything larger than that, the pump sprayers become just not really up to snuff. And so you need to go something a little bit larger, like an ATV mounted boom sprayer, or what we normally use our mist blower. So it's like a leaf blower, but it's got a herbicide tank on top. It's a great way to approach large control areas. It's not as selective as a backpack sprayer, but it will get a lot done a lot faster. So as Mark was saying, there's a lot of pre-emergent herbicides we can use to control it. So we have prodiamine and pendiethalin. These are great for control, but we have to make sure we're getting these out early in the season, like March, April, before the seeds start to germinate. These only are active on grass seeds that do not work once that seed starts to germinate. Also, you want to make sure you're using these when there's no snow on the ground, which, given that I'm from Wisconsin, I did my undergrad in the UP. March can be snowy, so these don't work in the snow. You don't want to make sure you're not doing this around snow, and this has time to get into the ground around any rainfall. Other pre-emergents that work are a mazipick. Now, I'm going to note on a mazipick, there's not a forest label setting. So if you're in a natural area like a meadow, a mazipick is great, but you can't use it in a forest. Other ones are metsulfametron and sulfametron methyl. These are two fantastic herbicides we use pretty frequently to control stiltgrass in forests. These are both pre and post emergence. So we rely a lot on metsulfametron and sulfametron methyls. They're both methyls because it'll attack the seeds, even if they're germinating, as well as kill growing plants. The other thing to know about these are all pre-emergent, and they can get a little interesting. Metsulfametron in particular does kill a lot of seed banked natives, and so you just want to be a little bit thoughtful. But if you're in an area that is already heavily invaded with stiltgrass, I'll tell you, there's not a lot that's going to come up anyways. So you just might as well go in and just spray the whole thing down with the pre-emergent. That'll get work done, and then you can come back through and kill anything afterwards. Really, we see a lot of good success. We'll talk about the combined treatment in a second. With just 1 year of pre-emergent, if you have a really heavy invasion, often you need two, but 1 year buys you a lot. As Mark showed, like with that pre-emergent, you really knock the seed bank back, and then you can fight the seed bank with just post-emergence, which allows for a little better restoration. Okay, so if you miss that pre-emergent window, so the pre-emergent window is March up until May, you can do the prodiamine. You can do prodiamine and pendimethamine in late March to mid-April, After that, those aren't going to work. You need to switch to either imazapic, metsulfametron, or sulfametron methyl, and that's going to work March all the way through the growing season. Though imazapic doesn't super kill grown plants, the metsulfametron and the sulfametron will kill plants that have emerged and are leafed out. Other herbicides that work well on this post-emergence, so when we have plants out, are going to be glyphosate. Works really well to knock apart stiltgrass. It is a broad spectrum herbicide that is going to kill a lot of broadleaf. So if you're in an area where you have plants that are sensitive and you want to be thoughtful about them, probably don't use glyphosate. Maybe you want to use uh, clem 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 clemdeath. Yeah, I can't do that one right now. So maybe you want to switch to a grass specific, or you can use sulfametron. This will kill some woodies. We use it also to kill bush honeysuckle, which can be a positive, but sometimes a negative. You can also go to metsulfametron, which is pretty great at killing most of your invasive herbs, as well as not damaging your native woodies. Though there is some concern that it may impact black cherry regeneration that's currently being studied. However, it's not going to kill your oaks and stuff like that. You can also use imazapic as your post-emergent herbicide. I find a lot of success mixing glyphosate and metsulfametron together. I'm just going to note that glyphosate and metsulfametron can make friends in your tank if you have them at too high of a percentage. And then they fall out of solution and form a white crystalline substance. So if you're going to tank mix glyphosate and metsulfametron, you want to go a little easy on the glyphosate. Metsulfametron can be applied at a pretty low rate, like 1 ounce per acre, and you're doing just fine. And the glyphosate also can be a very low rate. Stiltgrass, while it is a very intimidating plant when you're looking at it, is actually pretty easy to manage and responds very well to herbicides. It's not like autumn olive, where it's a pretty tough plant that can take multiple rounds of herbicide application or cut stump. This is pretty easy to kill. The thing that's difficult about stiltgrass is once it becomes established, it will just eat acres and acres. And so getting out there and getting on top of it can be overwhelming to start. But once you start making progress, it goes a long way. So let's look at management in some situations, and I'll talk you through how I would manage them. So here we have stiltgrass that's taken over this forest understory. Tomorrow I'm going to go out and manage a site just like this. It's got about 12 acres of forest that was knocked apart by emerald ash borer. The landowners have gone in and planted. However, they've planted like about 300 trees an acre. However, stiltgrass has taken over. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to misblow with my pre-emergent, and then potentially do a follow. I'm going to use metsulfametron, and then I'm going to follow up with metsulfametron again, as well as glyphosate. We'll see if the glyphosate goes, or maybe we have to switch to a different herbicide depending on how the trees are doing. If we have trees leafing out, then we're not going to use glyphosate. We'll switch to clemethadin, the clemethadin. So number one option, you get in there with your pre-emergent as soon as you can in that preseason, hit it with the pre-emergent. That's going to knock down your seed bank. Then you come back later in the season, in like July, and you hit any post-emergent, because there's going to be a few seeds that either you miss or that just kind of didn't get hit with the pre-emergent. So that second round of treatment buys you a lot. It does a lot of good stuff for you. You get about 90% control with that first pre-treatment or the pre-emergent, and then you can finish them off with your post-emergent. You'll probably need another year of control afterwards, and that can be just post-emergent, but that's going to do most of your control, and you can really get this forest back in 2 years. Then afterwards, you may want to think about planting some native forbs to reduce the chance of invasion of non-natives. If you can't get in there, because stuff happens, we're all busy, sometimes the weather doesn't cooperate, and you can't do a pre-emergent in April, then we got to move on to our next best solution. That's going to be 2 applications of post-emergence. Again, I will be doing a lot of this summer. And so what you want to do here is tank mix your metsulfametron and your glyphosate. Again, both of those at a relatively low concentration, just so they don't fall out of solution. The metsulfametron is going to it's going to get into that soil and attack that seed bank, and the glyphosate will kill any of this exposed stiltgrass. Now, we are going to kill some snakeroot. It's okay, snakeroot's fine. It comes back like no problem. So we're going to kill a lot of stuff in here. It's going to look bad for a year. And when I say it's going to look bad, it's going to look brown because we still killed all the stiltgrass, which is what we're going for. So that's going to happen in our first treatment in late May to early June. You can get in there a little bit earlier in May in Pennsylvania. I think the stiltgrass phenology is a little bit different in Wisconsin. But late May is when those leaves have really emerged and you can really identify them and then just hit them pretty hard. Then we're going to do a follow-up treatment in late July and early August. The reason we want to do a follow-up is sometimes stiltgrass will have a second generation flush out of the soil if you just use a post-emergent like glyphosate. And so we want to get in there and do a second treatment before it can go to flower. If that stiltgrass starts to flower, it will set seed, even if you cut it down and throw it in a bag. So we want to make sure we're killing it a second time, or we're going in there killing the second population before it can set seed. So 2 applications are necessary. And then the third option would be we go in here with trimmers and try to brush cut this down. And we're going to do that in late August. It's not a great option because sites are pretty large. It's pretty non-selective, and its success is really mixed on mechanical control. So I don't really recommend mechanical control often. Okay, now if it is moved into a wetland, which we see a lot, we cannot use our pre-emergence. We are stuck with just aquatic label products like glyphosate. So the best thing to do is to do 2 applications. We want to do one in late May or in early June when those leaves are fully out. That's going to kill all of our stiltgrass, but then we're going to see it's going to flush a second time. That's okay. That's going to help us exhaust that seed bank without using a pre-emergent. So we're going to hit that second round of germinants. Once they mature, we're going to hit them in July and August. Blast them twice, we're good to go. If you can only get in there for 1 application, which again happens, we're all busy, sometimes waterways flood, etc., and only 1 application is possible, you want to save that application until like the second half of July or early August. So that way it doesn't have time, that seed bank doesn't have time to push up a second generation, and those can't go to flower. So late July through early August before it goes to seed. If the plants go to seed, it doesn't make any sense to use a post-emergent. Then you might want to switch to a pre-emergent, but we'll get there. If you can't do any chemical application, then you can try mechanical means, so you can pull it up or cut it, and we're going to have to save that for August, but we're going to need to be in there before it sets flower, but not too close to when it sets flower. Once that flower bud emerges, it's going to go to seed. Okay, now the last one I want to talk about are invasions in meadows or prairies. So ideally, because we want our prairies to be a nice mix of, grasses and forbs and stuff like that, we're going to skip most of the pre-emergence. You can actually use a Mazza pick in a lot of these settings. A lot of our meadow plants don't respond to a Mazza pick, but stiltgrass does. So we could use an application of Mazza pick, but we don't want to do too many other things. So we could get in there with our pre-emergent, or we can just do those 2 applications of those 2 post-emergent applications of glyphosate. We can also use clethodim as a post-emergent as well as a pre-emergent. So we can get in there and try either of those, but we just want to be careful and make sure we're not killing the whole prairie, because a lot of our prairie plants and our meadowlands plants are going to be, susceptible to pre-emergence. And so we want to be a little bit thoughtful about which chemicals we're using where, and just only spot treating in them. You can do a growing season burn. You just want to be careful and make sure that you're able to handle a rather hot fire and that your meadow is fully established. We don't want to be burning meadows that are less than 3 years old because the ecosystem's going to fall apart. So only burn if it's an established ecosystem and you're set up to run a really hot fire, because that fire is either going to get really hot once it hits the stiltgrass, or it needs to be hot going into the stiltgrass because the stiltgrass will kill it. If you have a large invasion of stiltgrass, it might be worth just going through and hitting the whole thing with the pre-emergent and a post-emergent. So with the glyphosate metsulf-metron mix, killing a bunch of stuff and then reseeding. I've seen that done before. It's unfortunate when it happens, but it does happen that sometimes you just lose large areas and you got to reset the meadow and come back to it. You hate to do it, but it happens. If you have to use your post or your pre-emergent like metsulf-metron, you don't want to plant seeds for about 9 months afterwards, because that's how long that soil activity can last for. So you want to give the metsulf-metron in the spring, give it a full growing season, and then plant your seeds that next spring afterwards. You can spot spray any stiltgrass that comes up with glyphosate, but you don't want to get in there with any post-emergence afterwards. So you want to let those natives come up unless you're using a Mazza pick and the plants that you seeded are a Mazza pick tolerant. Okay. We have about 5 minutes for questions, so I'll stop myself there.
All right. Thank you so much, Calvin. That was a lot of great information. And thank you, Mark. Thank you, Keith. So yeah, feel free to keep popping those questions in the Q&A feature as well as the chat. And I'm going to put in here a link to our evaluation survey. Please take a few minutes to fill that out, either now or when you hop off the call. Should only take 2 to 3 minutes. And since here at Extension, we're all about sharing the best evidence-based information that we can to guide land stewardship, we also value using evidence to improve what we're doing. So your feedback will really help us make sure that we continue to improve our programming and outreach moving forward. So thank you for filling out that survey. So there are a few questions that have come in. One from Tony Johnson: how many times can stiltgrass set seed and germinate in a typical Wisconsin growing season? And Calvin talked about this out loud, but just to clarify the answer here as well, specifically, is that it sets flower in the late summer and early fall, and germination is in the spring. So it's possible a second round can come up if you control it early in the spring, and that requires a second round of management. But if you just let it do its thing, it's not going to have 2 full life cycles in a growing season.
Well, we can use that second germination to help empty the seed bank a little bit faster if you're in an area where pre-emergence aren't possible. So
Excellent. Yeah.
that can work to our advantage. We just have to remember that second round is coming if you do management really early. And don't be surprised when you see it. I mean, I've seen it happen a lot where people go out, they're on top of it, they do application in May, and they're like, I got it all killed. And then they call me up and they're like, oh, Kelvin, it came back, and I feel so bad. Don't feel bad. You're emptying the seed bank out faster. Just be prepped for that second round.
Yeah, and if I can just chime in, the phenology in Wisconsin is quite different and delayed. And a lot of information was learned by Wisconsin DNR. They actually had a graduate student that did some work on phenology. So it does not flower in Wisconsin until September. And so what that means, it's a little bit later. It's hard a lot of times to see it in July when we're out there looking at areas. And so Wisconsin DNR found that the later that they could do the surveys, the more plants they found because they were more developed. So it's going to be really hard to find it in the spring. Really start those surveys in late July and early August. And once you learn how to identify it, then I would say go in earlier. But really, since many of you haven't seen it before, focus those on that late July, early August timeframe.
Excellent. Thank you. There was also a question asking where can landowners go on a regular basis to see the maps that show reported occurrences. So I put in a link to the EdMaps website on there, and we'll include that in the follow-up email as well. That is automatically updated whenever a new report comes in. Like once that report gets verified, it'll show up on that map. And that's true for any invasive species that is studied through EdMaps. So that's a great resource. There was a question asking about future outreach. So outside of this webinar, for interested landowners and your team, is there or will there be any outreach to the general public, especially farmers, sportsmen, and ATV users, regarding preventing the spread of this invasive plant? Examples: the PR campaign and signs regarding cleaning boats in Minnesota to prevent spread of zebra mussels, or Farm Bureau's efforts in Illinois to prevent the spread of Palmer amaranth via equipment purchased in other states. I'll let others chime in on this as well. I'll just start by saying that here at Extension Forestry, we're definitely interested in continuing to engage on outreach on these topics, not just stiltgrass, but other invasive plants in general. We know that this is a big problem our forests are facing, and it's something that people really care about. So I personally don't have concrete plans for what that's going to look like, but I've been talking with Mark and others at Extension. I've had some initial conversations with folks at DATCAP and trying to build connections with DNR as well. So we can, whatever we do, it'll be well coordinated and have the effect that we're hoping for. Mark, anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, I think it really takes a community in this case. I mean, outreach. And so what you saw is Scott talked about outreach, Keith talked about outreach, Calvin talked about outreach, and we did. And so I just encourage many of you on this call, I know, do education is always focus on that aspect. A lot of people do mention it. I know Wisconsin DNR is going to have a big outreach campaign on Japanese honeysuckle, the vine. So we just got to continually communicate with those individuals. It's tough to get funding for this at the scale that I think the person that asked the question gave those examples, like Minnesota DNR, but it's really important.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, word of mouth really makes a big difference.
Scott,
Okay, yes,
if
go
you don't
ahead.
mind, I'd just like to add on, prevention is key with all these invasives. It's much easier to not have them than to teach people about them afterwards. So the other things that we can all do, even if we're not, natural resources educators, is make sure we're using native plants from local nurseries and we're making sure all of our gear and such is clean. So we're just not spreading invasives. It's way easier to not talk about things that we don't have than to try to do education campaigns about hundreds of invasive plants that we could possibly get. So prevention, prevention, prevention.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, compare a level of annoyance managing stiltgrass compared to managing reed canary grass. Any thoughts on that?
Stiltgrass is way easier because it doesn't get over your head. It will be just as intense and a similar management style, but it doesn't, it's not like 8 feet tall. So it's easier in that aspect.
Yeah,
Also,
and I think
it gives up the ghost faster.
just to add on, we're stiltgrass is an annual, so it's like managing crabgrass in your lawn. You have way more tools to manage that, where reed canary grass is a perennial with creepy rhizomes and stored energy. So way harder to manage that. We have tools that can eradicate reed canary grass well. The similarity is the seed bank, particularly in Pennsylvania. When you control it along a river, when that river floods, it's going to bring a bunch of new seed in. And whether that's stiltgrass or reed canary grass, you're going to have to manage that over many years. So we don't want to be like Pennsylvania in that way. We want to keep that seed source limited, and that's where we're at right now. And that's why we're spending a lot of resources trying to eradicate these populations.
I will add, and we discussed this before we did the webinar, is there is a perennial version of stiltgrass. It's called wavy leaf basket grass. It's not terribly far from the upper Midwest, so just keep your eyes out for that and prevent that one. We're getting that now in Pennsylvania. It's like stiltgrass, but in reverse. It's a perennial and it likes shade, but moves into full sunlight. So
Yeah,
that one I hope you guys don't run into. We're
I,
trying to do eradication here, and it's semi-successful.
yeah, and I believe it's in Indiana, but I don't think it's moved past Indiana. But we can check.
Okay, keep it there. Keep it there.
And it looks like we've got one more question that has come in, which is, Calvin and Mark, you both talked about a lot of different management options. So the question is, of those options, what is the least expensive chemical combination for landowners?
I think the least expensive is the one that works best the first time. That's my go-to. So you're gonna want to get in there with your pre-emergent, and then hit it a second time with the post-emergent. So that pre-emergent could be Metsoft Metron. A product name for that is Oust. Uh, Hit it with Oust, and then follow up with a glyphosate in the kind of mid-late growing season, or just tank mix them and hit them twice in the growing season. You should be able to control stiltgrass invasion, assuming there's no new input within 2 years. Within 2 years with that mix, you do, your Metsoft Metron in year one, year two, you don't need it. You can just go after that seed bank. You may need a second round or a third round in the fall, sorry, in the third year, but usually you could get invasions under control in 2 years. And glyphosate's pretty cheap. You can buy it basically everywhere. Metsoft Metron is a little bit more expensive, but it's not terrible. And you only need
Yeah,
like an ounce per acre.
yeah. I'd agree that if you're factoring in your time, getting the most effective strategy is going to be it, because time is money. Of the herbicides we've mentioned, clethodim is very inexpensive, and so that's the advantage of that one. So, and if you don't want to have a residual herbicide and worry about root uptake and other issues, I think clethodim is good. Glyphosate is another one. A lot of people don't like glyphosate for other reasons, and hopefully we don't have to talk about in this webinar. But it is relatively inexpensive. The pre-emergents are going to cost more, but then you're not going to have to manage them a lot more later too. So clethodim is very inexpensive. People mention milestone, aminopyrrolid, that works too, but that's much more expensive than glyphosate or clethodim, is why we don't talk about it as much.
Yeah, definitely. And then it responds to most herbicides. Some of them are, not all of them are labeled for forest settings. So if you're going to be managing it in a forest, just check to make sure it's labeled for forest settings.
And I'll just say, in kind of to finish this up, is it is complicated. Calvin and I do this for a living. So if you have questions, reach out to your local land steward or some specialist, or reach out to myself or extension, and we'll help you make that decision and talk about what those options are too. So don't feel like you can't reach out to us.
And if you don't feel comfortable applying herbicides, you don't have to. There are plenty of professionals that you can hire that will do it for you. And it's much cheaper to manage it and get on top of it than to deal with outbreaks after they've happened. Because once it gets established, you will lose your forest understory, you'll lose regeneration, you'll lose that diverse native understory, and then you got to get that back. And that takes a lot of money to plant seeds, and it's not always successful. And it takes a lot of time. So the earlier you can be on top of it, the cheaper and more effective you are.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you both. Thank you, Keith. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for your great questions. Again, please fill out that evaluation survey after you hop off the call. Just takes a couple minutes and it'll make our programming even better next time around. And we hope to see you again at another extension event soon. Keith, any last words from you?
No, thank you so much, everybody, for joining our webinar. I hope everybody has a great day.
Thanks. Take care, everyone.